On Cendrell, forgetting was neither misfortune nor private failing. It was a tax. The queues formed before the first work bell, although on Cendrell there had been no true mourning for longer than any surviving calendar could prove. The world kept one face turned toward a tired red sun, and the other toward a night of salt, ice, and listening towers. Between them lay a band of permanent dusk, and in that dusk stood Lumen Sepulchra, a city constructed around a light intended for other people. Its citizens waited beneath the lantern of Saint Avara with amber tokens pressed between their palms. Each token entitled the bearer to surrender one recollection. Doctrine specified that the memory should be personal, non-essential, and free of useful military information. A forgotten meal was considered ideal. A misplaced glove was acceptable. The face of a child was prohibited, unless an authorized assessor determined that the child possessed other faces in sufficient quantity. Assessors worked behind bronze grills with recall gauges. Green needles measured triviality. Amber needles measured attachment. When the two disagreed, attachment won. Cendrell's priests called this compassionate calibration, because the phrase extraction yield had caused complaints during an earlier century. Complaints had also been extracted. At the head of the queue, a woman entered a brass confession booth, carrying a little horse carved from dark wood. She emerged 6 minutes later. The horse remained in her hand. She turned it over, studying the blunt legs and worn mane. "Was this mine?" she asked. The attendant examined her receipt. Property continuity was not included in the extraction. I asked who made it. That information has been rendered devotional. Behind her, 300 citizens advanced 1 pace. The sacrifice was described as bloodless. This was true in the limited sense that the booths were scrubbed between donors. Priests taught that memory had no mass, and was therefore the lightest burden an imperial subject could carry. They did not mention the headaches, the marriages that acquired unexplained silences, or the veterans who woke knowing they had once been brave without recalling what courage had cost them. Such details considerably complicated the official hymn. High above them, the lantern burned amber against the black. It resembled a cathedral tower whose architects had begun with a lighthouse and become ashamed of its simplicity. Buttresses enclosed signal organs. Stone saints leaned over transmission vanes. Brass rings revolved around a crown of smoked crystal. Beyond sight, ships entered the widow's passage and trusted that light more completely than most men trusted the emperor. Senior mnemonic auditor Lysa Rook arrived while the queue was still moving. Her cutter crossed the dusk in silence, narrow as a black seal pressed against the rust-red horizon. Lysa watched the lantern through the cabin glass. She was 39, with cropped dark hair, a single white streak at the right temple, and the narrow patience of someone accustomed to errors that had survived several generations of approval. A brass augmetic occupied the place of her left ear. Her charcoal robes were immaculate. Her red wax cloth satchel had not left her hand in 11 years. Before leaving the stair, Lysa paused beside the woman. She asked whether the woman wished to object. The woman stared at the toy, apologized for delaying the queue. Lysa wrote nothing. Some evidence was too orderly to improve with ink. Prelate Marshal Oren Vask received her beneath a triumphal arch. "Cendrell welcomes the office of civic continuity," he said. Cendrell requested a population reconciliation, a ceremonial phrase, "Our census is exact." Then the reconciliation will be brief. Oren smiled with the caution of a man discovering a blade inside a gift. He offered her the procession, the reliquary, and a view of the annual illumination. Lysa asked for sewage volume, oxygen consumption, ration mass, clinic dressings, lamp oil, and boot sole replacements. By the 4th hour the census remained exact. By the 5th, everything else disagreed. Lumen Sepulchra declared 2,806 residents. Its people consumed air for 2,900 and 1,427. They ate for slightly fewer, bled for slightly more, and wore through enough boots to suggest that 87,421 unregistered citizens spent their days walking quickly. Accumulated machine error, Oren said. Lysa looked down into the service atrium. An iron lift arrived below them. Its gate opened. No one came out. The weight dial recorded 6 adult passengers. Machines, Lysa said, rarely eat. The empty lift descended. The official explanation arrived in 17 parts. The Office of Elementary Provision blamed expired ration coefficients. The Office of Respiratory Stewardship blamed condensation in the oxygen meters. The Lamp Workers Guild blamed pilgrims, although no pilgrim vessel had landed for 9 months. The Census Authority blamed no one because its figures were perfect, and perfection has traditionally been exempt from investigation. Lysa collected every explanation, stamped each as received, and placed them in the red satchel. She began with the drains. Wastewater was vulgar, but it possessed a useful resistance to doctrine. It did not care whether a citizen was registered, absolved, condemned, or administratively inconvenient. It merely measured what the city had eaten and returned. The drains insisted on 87,000 additional bodies. So did the bakeries, the infirmaries, the cremation furnaces, and the municipal stores that issued replacement souls. The discrepancy shifted by a few hundred according to season and industrial injury, but it never vanished. Someone lived between Cendrell's numbers. Someone ate its bread, breathed its air, and occasionally required a left boot. To test whether the surplus belonged to transient laborers, Lysa closed 3 ration gates. Pressure alarms sounded in service tunnels absent from her map. When she reopened them, sealed meal packets vanished from a counting tray while the attending clerk looked through the hands taking them. He blamed vibration. At the 3rd Lamp Workers' Refectory, Lysa counted 80 chairs. The foreman counted 80 as well. "Your floor disagrees," she said. 7 pale rectangles interrupted the soot beneath the tables. Their edges had been polished by feet. The foreman looked at them, frowned, and turned toward a worker carrying a bowl. The worker moved sideways to avoid something in the aisle. His soup tilted around an obstacle no one acknowledged. "Decorative seating was removed last winter," the foreman said. "Why?" "Obstruction." "To whom?" The foreman opened his mouth. His expression emptied before the answer arrived. In the Western Exchanger Hall, a broken turbine had been repaired during the night. The work was precise. 6 tool chests had been issued, 12 gloves returned for cleaning, and 42 kilograms of coolant consumed. No crew appeared on the shift roll. "Who completed the repair?" Lysa asked. The overseer consulted his slate. "Maintenance. Names. The maintenance names, which are..." He scrolled upward, then downward, as if a person might emerge from sufficient movement. Blank spaces divided the entries. The slate knew where the names belonged. It simply declined to contain them. Lysa took the tool ledger to an archive clerk. The clerk was a soft, earnest man named Pell Ordis, who apologized to documents before opening them. "There are no omissions," he assured her. "There are 12. Those are spacing provisions." "For what?" "Omissions." She stared at him. Ordis lowered his voice. "The forms are older than our terminology." In the public corridors, Lysa began watching movement rather than people. Crowds divided around vacant patches. Doors opened before anyone reached them. A handrail depressed beneath invisible weight. Twice she found herself stepping aside without knowing why. The second time she held her position. Something struck her shoulder, warm and solid. She heard a muttered apology. By the time she turned, the corridor contained only registered citizens. Lysa tested the phenomenon with chalk. She marked the floor around each vacant pressure and ordered Ordis to watch. Within minutes, clerks had walked around the circles while insisting they were empty. One set down a parcel in midair. Unseen hands caught it. Another apologized to an unoccupied doorway. Ordis recorded 6 anomalies, reread his own notes, and concluded that Lysa had drawn the circles for ventilation. His conclusion was properly witnessed, countersealed, and wrong in every available measurable particular. Ordis watched the court parcel settle against nothing. Recognition seemed to surface, then sink. Lysa asked what he saw. A filing error, he answered. The unseen carrier shifted the parcel to one hip. Its leather strap bent around a shoulder the clerk could not consciously retain. Oren Vask met her in the audit close at second bell. Oxblood robes covered black ceremonial armor. A ring of shrine keys hung at his waist, each one heavy enough to serve as a weapon. "The 9th Penitent Armada has advanced its approach," he said. "Lantern preparation now takes precedence. Over 87,000 citizens. Over a discrepancy. Citizens eat, discrepancies do not. You mistake consumption for identity." Lysa requested the raw rejection logs from the recollection tithe, memories refused as too important, too intimate, or too dangerous to remove. The archive cogitator informed her that such logs had never existed. Then it printed a destruction receipt. The receipt was dated that morning. Its final page carried an older seal impressed so deeply that the paper had split. The authorized donor was Lysa Rook. The extraction had occurred 28 years earlier on Cendrell. She had never visited Cendrell. That, at least, was what she remembered. Oren Vask allowed the inspection because refusal would have required a form he could not produce before midday. The Basilica of Gentle Surrender occupied the eastern flank of the lantern. Its nave held 200 confession booths arranged in perfect rows beneath statues of Saint Avara. In every statue, the saint was shown smiling as she offered a golden flame to the dark. None depicted the wires. Citizens entered by the southern doors carrying amber tokens. They departed north with receipts, headaches, and one less private possession. Each booth had an empty brass hook for personal effects and a drain cut discreetly beneath the kneeling rail. The hook suggested donors would leave lighter. The drain suggested the architects had expected other outcomes. Lysa checked both before allowing Oren to continue. The attendants wore white masks and waxed aprons. Each booth contained a kneeling rail, a brass crown, and a little red lever for emergencies. Lysa asked what emergency required the donor to pull it after surrendering the memory of danger. The attendant consulted his manual. No answer appeared. He polished the lever instead. Across the nave a choir sang slowly. Notes outlived memory itself. Confessors guided the process. "Choose something without obligation," one advised an old soldier. "A taste, a smell, a minor discomfort." The soldier selected the wine served at his regiment's founding feast. Brass arms settled around his skull. Needles entered the extraction scar at his thumb. A warm amber mist gathered inside a glass ampoule. When he rose, the confessor asked what he had surrendered. "Something sweet," he said. "I think we were happy." The next donor was a turbine worker. She offered the memory of losing a glove in a drainage channel. The gauge remained dark. "Low coherence," said the attendant. The worker tried again. She spoke of her brother finding the glove, drying it above a stove, and wearing it on his head to make her laugh. The gauge brightened. Afterward she remembered the glove. She remembered the stove. When asked about her brother, she looked at the attendant with polite confusion. The worker looked toward the exit and asked whether someone should be waiting for her. The attendant checked a family column, covered it with his thumb, and said no. Lysa uncovered the entry. It contained a second ration allocation and no name. "Relational contamination," Lysa said. Beside her, Enginseer Exactor Corda 9 moved along a ceiling rail in a tall brass cradle. 4 porcelain faceplates surrounded a black sensor column. Green apertures opened behind each mouth. Extraction boundaries demonstrate acceptable variance. A prohibited memory was taken. The donor retains 23 other family associations. That was not the regulation. Regulation follows available yield. At the final booth, a little boy watched his father surrender a lullaby. The father emerged unable to finish its first line. The boy sang it for him. The man smiled, thanked the child, and asked where he had learned it. Lysa stopped taking notes. Overhead, chains carried the amber ampules toward the lantern. Most held only cloudy light. Others pulsed with momentary forms. Rain across glass, a woman turning in a doorway, boots beside a hospital bed, 2 hands separating at a station gate. They have not been destroyed, Lysa said. Pending illumination, Corder 9 replied. Are they conscious? Consciousness is not a certified property of recollection. That was not my question. It was the available answer. Lysa produced the receipt bearing her name. Corder 9 took it with a cable manipulator and rotated all 4 faces toward the seal. Authentic. I was 11. Correct. I had never been here. Incorrect. The engine seer summoned a sealed tray from the lower vault. 1 ampoule lay inside, darker than the others. Scratches marked its brass collar. Lysa's name appeared only as a pattern of machine punches. She touched the glass. The ampoule was warm. Something inside it pressed back against her scarred thumb. The basilica vanished. For one instant she stood beneath an amber sky with a girl's hand locked around hers. The girl was perhaps 15, thin and fierce, with Lysa's dark eyes. Warning bells shook the floor. Adults pushed toward a row of open booths. Do not let them take my name, the girl said. Lysa knew her. Tavia. The name entered her mind with the pain of blood returning to a frozen limb. Then the basilica returned. Lysa's hand was empty. A grey-clad runner slipped between the booths, carrying the ampoule. He was young, perhaps 17, with a service bell and slate hanging from his belt. The amber cord at his throat flashed once beneath the lamps. Stop him, Lysa ordered. No one moved. She pursued him past the confession rows and into the maintenance gallery. He turned left behind a bank of incense pipes. Lysa followed. The corridor beyond was empty. She slowed, confused by her own breath. Her right hand was clenched. She opened it. Someone had written 4 words across her glove in black maintenance grease. Follow K.R. Do not look away. A small bell sounded behind her. The runner stood 3 paces away. My name is Keir Soul, he said. You have met me twice. Lysa looked at the grease on her glove, then at the amber ampoule in his hand. Return that. You said that the first time. When was the first time? Before I wrote on you. Keir backed into the maintenance passage. He was slim, freckled, and shaved-headed, with the wiry stillness of someone accustomed to being struck by people who later denied seeing him. A pale amber cord circled his throat. His grey lampworker smock bore no number. Follow close, he said. When I turn a corner, read your hand. Lysa did. At the first corner she remembered. At the second she found herself alone beside a steam valve, wondering why she had left the basilica. The words on her glove supplied a name without meaning. Then a small service bell rang ahead. Attention returned like a hook pulled through cloth. Keir waited beneath the next lamp. My name is Keir Soul, he repeated. You have met me 4 times, 3. You argued about the number once. He showed her how he survived. The amber cord carried knots for roots, promises, and people he would not permit himself to lose. The slate at his belt contained pictures rather than names, because written names slid from a reader's mind almost as easily as faces. He placed tools in doorways so doors could not close without someone asking why. The bell made sound into a temporary address. His methods had the intelligence of traditions built without permission. Nothing depended upon recognition lasting. Everything assumed it would fail. then placed a bell, knot, or body where forgetting had to stumble. His precautions were rehearsed each morning. Keir placed his bell in the same pocket, counted every knot, and tested whether his own face remained in the slate. If a picture faded, he redrew its shape from a mirror before the mirror became another stranger. "People can see you," Lysa said, "while they try. Pick recorders. They keep the shape. Clerks call it blur. Machines call it damaged data. People call it nothing." He passed her the ampoule. "Why steal it? To see whether it knew you. It is glass. So are windows. They know which side the weather belongs on." Keir had been 6 when an assessor took the memory of a turbine fire from his mother. The fire contained Keir pulling her away from a ruptured line. The extraction removed the event, then the reason for his scar, then the relationship that gave both meaning. Within a month, Marisol could no longer retain her son. They reached a worker dormitory. Keir raised one finger for silence. A broad-faced woman opened the door. She wore insulated gloves and held a brass wrench against one shoulder. "You again," she said to Keir. "Keir Soul. Lamp maintenance. Have you eaten?" "Not recently enough." Mera brought him bread wrapped in cloth. Her gaze rested on the burn along his left forearm. Lysa watched Mera's eyes return to Keir 3 times while the bread was fetched. Each glance discovered him anew. The first was suspicious, the second concerned, the third almost fond. None lasted long enough to become a fourth. "You should have that treated. It healed 11 years ago. You are too young to lie so badly." For a moment something moved behind her eyes. Her free hand lifted toward his face. Keir stopped breathing. A bell sounded in the distant works. Mera blinked. Her hand fell. "Was there something else?" she asked Lysa. Keir stood directly before her. "No," Lysa said. Mera closed the door. Before the latch settled, footsteps carried her away. Keir ate the bread. "She is kind to strangers," he said. "I have tested it thoroughly." Lysa opened her field register. She entered his name, age, employment, physical description, and maternal relation. The letters remained visible. "You are recorded." Keir looked over her shoulder. "Read the line above mine." She could not find his entry. Lysa closed the register, reopened it, and found the page ready to deny him again with perfect patience. "Records do not forget," Lysa said. "The lantern does. A mechanism cannot alter an imperial register without leaving evidence." "Then perhaps I am the evidence." He led her deeper into the lampworks. They passed workers who stepped aside for him without looking, guards who paused at his bell and immediately lost interest, and a shrine where offerings accumulated before a blank patch of wall. At last Keir stopped beside a mosaic of Saint Avara. One amber tile had been replaced by a black iron handle. "Your census is not missing 87,000 people," he said. "It is standing on top of them." He pulled the handle. The saint's stone face divided down the middle. Beyond it, bridges and dwellings descended through an immense green-lit cavern. Thousands of people moved among pipes, turbines, hanging chains, and steam. Bells answered one another across the dark. The hidden city was crowded enough to have weather. Lysa stared. Behind her the mosaic closed. Keir rang his bell before she could forget why she had come. The hidden city called itself the Blank Quarter because no official had ever given it a better insult. It occupied cooling caverns beneath the lampworks, where stone arches older than the lantern supported pipes large enough to carry processionals. Green maintenance lamps burned through wet vapor. Bridges crossed black reservoirs. Chains descended into depths that answered with the patient machinery of buried organs. People filled every level. They did not move like citizens. Citizens expected to be noticed. These men and women announced themselves before touching a shoulder, entering a room, or asking a question. Bells marked crossings. Children wore painted masks with simple shapes so parents could follow the shape after the face slipped away. Families tied cords from wrist to wrist when they slept. At every crossing, a resident rang once before entering and twice before leaving. The pattern allowed families to count departures even when they could not preserve faces. A missed bell stopped an entire bridge. No one complained. In the blank quarter, caution was the nearest available form of recognition. How many? Lysa asked. Today, Keir said. No one can hold the total. The quarter's registrar was an old woman named Hessa. She sat beneath a canopy of knotted ropes with a different object arranged before each household: spoons, buckles, teeth, prayer beads, scraps of cloth, a cracked lens, one clean white stone. Names fail, Hessa said. Objects are stubborn. She remembered every resident because the lantern had taken almost everyone who might remember her. Memory, deprived of a place to return, had accumulated in her like water behind a blocked drain. Hessa touched each object before naming its household. She never pointed at a person first. A spoon could survive a broken association, a face could not. When a buckle changed tables, 3 adults followed it without asking. Their obedience to the object was practiced, quiet and complete. Lysa showed her badge. Imperial Office of Civic Continuity. We wondered when continuity would notice us. How long has this place existed? Longer than the office, shorter than the lie. Keir guided Lysa through the quarter. Unrecalled crews cleaned the amber drains beneath the confession booths. They replaced cooling veins, hauled condenser salts, and entered hot chambers where recognized workers would have required hazard pay. Their rations were labeled lubricant. Their blankets were insulation inventory. Medicines appeared in the budget as corrosion inhibitor. Cendrell had not concealed its missing citizens by deleting expense. It had changed the nouns. In a dormitory, 3 hollow men sat upright on a bench. Their bodies breathed. Their hands opened and closed according to a work bell no longer sounding. Hessa explained that too much extraction did not always create an unrecalled person. Sometimes it removed the person from himself as well. What happens to them? Lysa asked. They are assigned simple labor until they stop. And afterward, the furnaces remember. Along the eastern wall stood shelves crowded with identity objects. Keir showed Lysa the things left by residents who had vanished into work shafts or died without witnesses. A child's boot, a blue ribbon, a rusted key, a cup repaired 7 times, a wooden bird with 1 wing. The lantern began a calibration pulse. Amber light traveled through the pipes. Everyone in the quarter became still. The stone released scents that did not belong underground: rain on summer dust, scorched sugar, ocean salt, a clean infant's head. Voices murmured inside the coolant channels. Lysa heard a girl laughing. Her right thumb burned around its old extraction scar. A memory opened. Tavia dragging her through a corridor while warning bells struck the walls. Tavia was older. Tavia was real. At the end of the corridor waited booths filled with amber light. Do not let them take my name. The pulse passed. Green darkness returned. Keir was holding Lysa upright. Who is Tavia? He asked. Lysa had spoken the name aloud. She could still feel it, but its edges were already softening. My sister. You said you had none. The records say I had none. Above them, armored boots entered the service galleries. Oran's search parties crossed the upper bridge in disciplined ranks. Their helmet lamps passed directly over the crowd below. Several soldiers looked down. Their weapons followed their eyes for a moment, then lowered. Keir extinguished his lamp. Around him, hundreds of others did the same silently. One trooper descended a stair, collided with a woman carrying coolant, and demanded to know who had struck him. The woman moved aside. Before he reached the landing, he had forgotten why he was there. The unrecalled watched in silence. It was not safety. A man can destroy what he cannot remember, provided someone writes the order clearly. Keir led Lysa toward a lower conduit. Every strong illumination makes more of us, he said. Sometimes hundreds, sometimes a district. The coming flare? The bells have never prepared this many booths. Hesse began pulling cords across the passage, guiding families toward deeper chambers. The object shelves trembled. Far above, the lantern's signal organs changed pitch. Every service bell in the blank quarter rang at once. The sound traveled through the cavern like rain on metal. Lysa looked up. Through a crack in the vaulted roof, a point of red engine light crossed the amber glow of the lantern. It belonged to a black cutter descending from orbit, small beside the shrine and armed well beyond piety. Keir's expression tightened. "Who is it?" Lysa recognized the vessel's absence of heraldry. "Someone," she said. "The records are trained to remember. The Inquisition had arrived." Interrogator Sava Dren did not descend beneath banners. Her cutter locked against the western landing tower while its engines were still cooling, and she crossed the bridge into Lumen Sepulchra with 12 officers, a sealed order, and no priest to announce her. The bells prepared a ceremonial welcome. Dren ordered them stopped after the first stroke. She was shorter than Lysa had expected, compact beneath a black storm coat, with an iron gauntlet enclosing her right hand and a pistol whose single red lens never quite faced the floor. Oren Vask met her at the lantern nave in armor beneath his oxblood robes. He began the customary blessing. Dren placed the sealed order on his prayer desk. 31 hours, she said. The tactical projection unfolded above the desk in cold blue planes. The widow's passage appeared as a narrow amber wound inside a storm front that had swallowed 3 neighboring routes. Behind it waited the 9th Penitent Armada, warships around hospital barges, troop carriers lashed to pilgrim hulks, evacuation vessels whose holds contained families from 3 frontier worlds. The symbols were too numerous to read separately. That was one purpose of symbols. 3,940,000 people were moving toward the passage. They could not turn without entering the storm's advancing wall. They could not wait because their provisions had been calculated for a shorter war and a kinder universe. In 31 hours they would cross under the lantern's beam, or their navigators would choose among false horizons until the ships became funerals without graves. Beyond the projection, those people already waited in the actual dark. Surgeons tied themselves to operating frames aboard the Mercy of Oris because gravity failed whenever the storm struck. Refugee children slept beneath cargo netting on the Pilgrim's Dew. Press gang deck crews passed water along corridors built for ammunition, while officers removed insignia from lifeboats to prevent arguments over precedence. None knew Cendrell's name. They knew only that an amber line was supposed to appear, and that every official timetable treated its appearance as a fact. Dren expanded the ledger. 9 ships had lost their navigational choirs. A hospital barge reported 12 minutes of air remaining in a surgical deck after a storm fracture. On the command carrier, officers were drawing lots to decide which civilian hulls would receive the escort beacons. Each message reached Cendrell hours late and ended with the same request: confirm illumination. The interrogator touched one symbol with her iron thumb. It became a maternity transport carrying 11,000 infants whose registry had not assigned them names. "This is why I brought an order instead of an argument," she said. Oren proposed an emergency recollection tithe. Every booth could remain open. Voluntary donors could be doubled, then tripled. Corder 9 rotated 2 porcelain faces toward him. Ordinary extraction will provide 17.4% of required coherence. Devotional willingness does not alter yield. A second calculation opened beneath the first, sealed behind a classification Lysa had not encountered in any civic index. Greet remembrance. Lysa set her recall gauge beside Dren's order. She described the blank quarter, the false census, and 87,000 living people classified as maintenance continuity. She showed Keir's service bell, the altered ration accounts, and the extraction scars hidden beneath mechanical expense codes. Dren listened without interruption. If I acknowledge these people, will the beam strengthen? No. Will exposing the fraud move the armada? No. Then your audit is suspended. Keir stood near the western column, repeating his name beneath his breath. Dren's officers looked across him whenever he moved. He had almost reached the service door when Dren noticed the small bell swinging without an owner. She caught his wrist with her iron gauntlet. Her attention slipped from his face at once, but the gauntlet remained closed. She looked down at her own fist, then forced her eyes back to him. "Keir Soul," he said, "you will forget me when you turn." Dren turned toward Lysa. The boy vanished from her expression. The iron hand did not open. She looked back and found him again, as one might find a wound after first noticing the blood. For several seconds she studied the burn across his forearm and the amber cord at his throat. Understanding did not soften her. It made the decision cost something. "This is what your light does?" she asked Oren. "This is part of what it prevents," he replied. Dren released Keir and signed the emergency order. Black wax spread beneath her seal, filling the grooves with a darkness that looked wet. "I have 4 million souls 6 hours behind my orders," she said. "Do not ask me to value them one at a time." The sealed calculation descended through the prayer desk into the machinery below. Corder 9 recited the necessary collection radius. It was not the lampworks alone, nor the blank quarter, nor the adults already registered for the yearly tithe. The great remembrance required every relational memory in the central city. Dren's officers confined Lysa in a consultation room whose door had been designed to resist explosives, heresy, and changes of jurisdiction. It had not been designed for a boy no guard could remember admitting. Keir entered with a water tray, placed his bell against Lysa's palm, and told her his name twice. When the guard opened the door to remove a cup he did not remember delivering, Keir stepped into the corridor. Lysa followed the sound of the bell. By the time the alarm was raised, the officers were searching an empty room and arguing over which of them had last seen the auditor. They crossed the blank quarter through cooling passages already hot with lantern preparation. Green fluid wept from pipe joints and stained the hem of Lysa's robes. Below the object wall, an abandoned funeral lift waited behind a gate of blackened brass. Its destination plate had been scraped smooth. Keir struck the lowest control with his service key. The lift descended for 9 minutes. Imperial ornament ended first. Saints disappeared from the panels. Skulls gave way to circles, circles to paired lines, and paired lines to simple geometric knots cut directly into brass. The older builders had not hidden function beneath devotion. Their machinery seemed almost indecent in its honesty. When the doors opened, warm amber light extended farther than Lysa's sight. Reservoirs rose through the cavern like organs in a glass cathedral. Each contained tiers of recollection ampoules, not thousands, but billions, held in articulated racks that moved with the patience of tides. Gold wires passed from vessel to vessel. A pressure tremor ran through them, and the nearest glass whispered rain against a roof Lysa had never seen. Another offered bread torn open by a father's hands. Another held the weight of a sleeping infant. Fear came from the next bank, clean and immediate. A locked room, an approaching boot, a promise not kept. The impressions vanished before thought could claim them, leaving only bodily certainty behind. Keir pressed both palms to his temples. "These are the dreams." "They are recollections," Lysa said, "not ours. They move through the pipes when the lantern wakes." We thought the dead were dreaming badly. A rail clicked above them. 4 green apertures opened in the dark. Corder 9 descended upon its brass cradle, porcelain faces turning independently around the black sensor column. Human attention could be persuaded to slide past Keir. Machine rangefinders retained heat, mass and obstruction with less imagination. Unauthorized biological variables have entered sealed continuity infrastructure, it said. Remain stationary for correction. Lysa raised her recall gauge. Senior auditors may inspect any mechanism contributing to a certified civic count. Your authority is suspended. Suspension was entered after the discrepancy was reported. Continuity Statute 9 preserves an auditor's access where subsequent orders may conceal causal evidence. Technical audit permitted, Corder 9 said. Duration, 4 minutes. The allowance appeared in red numerals. Each question cost seconds. Lysa photographed intake valves, rack numbers, and the sediment gathered beneath the oldest reservoirs. Keir held his bell beside every image, an impossible witness fixed in brass reflection. Corder 9 followed while its cradle scored sparks from the rail. At the second bank, Lysa found paired serials beneath newer classification plates. One number marked the memory. Its twin marked a person transferred to infrastructure service. The pairings continued beyond the gauge's capacity to count. Corder 9 shuttered the projection when she touched them. Preservation requires separation, it said. Preservation for whom? The red timer lost 11 seconds before answering. Lysa walked beneath the reservoirs. What does the lantern burn? The term is doctrinal. What does it consume? Relational coherence is not consumed. It is isolated, indexed, and maintained under directed stress. Corder 9 projected a line through a model of the Widow's Passage. The line shifted whenever the surrounding storm changed. Around it appeared points formed from recollections. Names, faces, promises, injuries, rooms, touches, shared meals. Each identity held its shape because other identities confirmed it. The warp could counterfeit a star, a distance, even the sequence of cause and consequence. It struggled to counterfeit a person remembered consistently by many minds. The lantern assembled those consistencies into coordinates and forced the storm to admit that somewhere remained somewhere. The donors are awake in there, Keir said. Awareness is not a binary category. Lysa looked at the racks moving in their amber tide. They are awake enough to point. The ampoules were not fuel. They were fingers held rigid toward a road. 4,000 years of human experience had been severed from its owners and kept under pressure because direction was easier to schedule than consent. Keir's expression changed as he listened to a woman laughing inside the glass. They keep trying to find us. At the cavern's end stood doors without locks. Only 2 vast brass plates engraved with paired hands. Corder 9's cradle halted. Primary index access is prohibited. The doors opened anyway. Beyond them, concentric rings climbed through a chamber large enough to contain the lantern's public nave. At their center hung a child-sized figure inside amber crystal. Braided white hair rested upon a simple black shift. Fine gold wires entered her closed eyelids and sternum. The rings turned around her with the slow precision of whirls. Her eyes opened. The reservoirs spoke through her in rain, bread, terror, and the warmth of a sister's hand. Then the child looked directly at Lysa and called her by the name Tavia had used before either of them could pronounce Lysa. The name was not recorded in any childhood file. It belonged to a room with blue walls, 2 narrow beds, and a girl whispering beneath a blanket while rain worried the shutters. Lysa knew this before she knew that she had fallen to her knees. Saint Avara did not speak again. She gave them salt. It filled Lysa's mouth, followed by the pitch of a wooden deck and the pressure of small fingers locked around a brass rail. Stars wheeled beyond cracked glass. A ship drifted without a route while something vast moved behind the dark, testing each frightened thought for weakness. Avara had been 13. She had not worn a halo. She had been the youngest navigator aboard a refugee vessel whose instruments had begun offering mutually impossible destinations. The crew gathered around her because isolation was killing her faster than the storm. They spoke to keep her present. One sailor named the orchard where his brother had broken an arm. A woman remembered the burn on her wife's wrist and the argument that followed it. A cook described the first bowl Avara had washed badly, and the laughter she had tried to conceal. Each person held a piece of another. The memories crossed, agreed, and formed a structure the warp could bend but not persuade. Through that structure, Avara found a road. Amber light opened ahead of the ship. No recollection was taken. Nothing was stored. The crew reached Cendrell, carrying every grief and kindness with which they had begun. The vision continued beyond arrival. Avara walked the refugee deck after the passage released them, touching foreheads, repeating names she had borrowed during the crossing. Sailors corrected her. For 3 nights they slept in a circle because none trusted solitude yet. Their concordance faded naturally as distance returned, leaving each mind intact. Concordance, Lysa whispered. The rings brightened. The next memories arrived colder. Generations of custodians surrounded Avara's chair with measuring arms. Mutual witness required trust, attention, and the dangerous possibility that citizens might choose one another over an order. Extracted recollection could be numbered. It could be warehoused, tested, and released on a timetable. Lysa saw the first custodians record this as an operational defect. A method that ended when people stopped consenting could not guarantee a fleet schedule. They proposed permanent participants, then sedation, then extraction. Each revision entered the archive as efficiency. Each removed another human choice while preserving the original word. Avara remembered every revision because the machinery required her conscious recognition. The chair became a cradle. The cradle became an amber prison. The child who had survived the first illumination was declared dead because a martyr required fewer maintenance disclosures than a prisoner. Gold wires entered her eyes. Oren's predecessors built halos around the restraints and called the result sainthood. Scheduled extraction stabilized the passage through 4,112 years, Corder 9 said. Documented transit survival exceeds the projected concordance baseline by 6,800,000,000 lives. The number settled into the chamber without mercy or exaggeration. Lysa believed it. That was the obscenity. A false calculation could be rejected. A true one had to be answered. Kia stared upward at the small body. How many people did she save? Insufficient data. How many did you leave awake in jars? Insufficient relevance. Avara moved one finger against the crystal. Lysa smelled boiled linen. She was 7 years old, sick in a transport bunk, while an older girl cooled her face with a wet sleeve. Tavia's hair was iron black like hers, but longer, always escaping its ties. She could whistle through a gap in her front teeth. She had stolen 2 ration plums and blamed a priest who disliked fruit. The memory widened. Their convoy had reached Cendrell during the 11th emergency flare. The lantern was failing. Officials entered the refugee hold seeking relational donors whose loss would not damage local productivity. Tavia gripped Lysa's hand while a recall gauge measured the strength between them. There had been no volunteers after the first hour. Later records had improved the wording. Tavia was selected. Perhaps she stepped forward when they threatened to take both sisters. Perhaps frightened adults moved her. The memory fractured at that point, scorched white around the decision. Lysa saw herself in an extraction booth, screaming Tavia's name while assessors drew every shared moment from her. A relationship provided greater yield when harvested from both ends. Tavia entered the lantern. Lysa was returned to the convoy with a scar around her right thumb and papers certifying that she had always been an only child. Her entire career followed from that correction. She had trusted records because a document did not wake at night grieving a person it could not prove. The Office of Civic Continuity had given her an absence, then employed her talent for finding what absences cost. Kia crouched beside her but did not touch her until he had said his name. Tavia existed, he said. Lysa closed her hand around the scar. Yes. All around them the reservoirs began to murmur. Faces pressed through amber illumination, never fully visible, each fragment reaching toward a mind that no longer knew where to receive it. "Release them," Kia said. Avara showed why. "They cannot simply be opened," Lysa said. Avara gave her the image of threads cut from a tapestry and thrown into another. Memory without its relational anchor did not return home. It invaded. 4,000 years of release without order would replace millions of selves with accidental crowds. The child's lips moved with visible effort. "Put them back where they belong." Red light entered the brass rings. Corder 9's faces turned toward a calculation only it could see. "Great Remembrance Preliminary Sequence active," it said. "Central collection begins in 53 minutes. Lysa used the remaining authority of her office as one might use a blade after its handle had broken. She ordered Corder 9 to expose every historical record whose access seal depended upon the phrase civic continuity. The machine refused 6 times. On the 7th, she joined the refusal codes into proof that the records existed. The sealed strata opened beneath Avara's chamber. 11 columns rose from the floor, each carrying a century of censored history. Official accounts described plague containment, orderly migration, labor renewal, and the occasional evacuation of districts made unsafe by subsidence. Lantern output records told another story. Every civic disappearance aligned exactly with an emergency flare through the Widow's Passage. After each flare, Cendrell reported fewer citizens and unchanged production. Transit authorization shared paper fibers with disappearance warrants. A sealed picked plate showed officials painting numbers over inhabited doors before occupants were taken below. In another, settlers received keys while shapes watched through cellar grills beneath their feet. Lysa copied everything to her recall gauge and 3 service relays. Corder 9 attempted to classify the copies. Kia rang his bell beside each relay, forcing workers to notice the transmissions afresh whenever attention wandered. Files spread through maintenance terminals faster than the machine could close them. For the first time, the buried generations entered the city above as evidence rather than rumor. The survivors had not died. They rose, ate when food was placed before them, and returned to tasks their muscles remembered. They could operate presses, clean heat exchangers, and follow a bell from one room to another. Ask one where she learned the work, and she would wait calmly for a memory that no longer existed. Ask whom she loved, and the question passed through her without finding a place to hurt. The archives called them hollow. New settlers arrived from debtor worlds and refugee fleets. They inherited warm houses from occupants who still slept below those houses in service vaults. Streets were raised upon older streets. Walls concealed doors to apartments whose residents had become maintenance inventory. Names were ground from memorial stone, and each generation received a different official explanation printed upon the same durable forms. There had been no cycle of replacement, no miracle of duplicated flesh. Cendrell was a layered city. Beneath every remembered population labored the discarded living generations that had paid for its survival. In the 5th stratum, a schoolroom remained sealed beneath a turbine hall. Small desks faced a slate scrubbed of every lesson, while adult workers in faded uniforms slept in the adjoining cable trench. Their hands still formed the gestures of an old counting game when bells rang at shift change. In the 8th, an avenue had been roofed over and renamed as a ventilation chamber. Meals waited on tables inside its apartments for families who had continued setting places long after they could remember whom the empty bowls served. Shrine keys sounded behind Lysa. Oren entered alone. He looked older without attendance, though the gold cloud in his left eye remained as bright as ever. He read the 11 columns without asking what they contained. "You knew," Lysa said. "I inherited knowledge sufficient to keep the passage open. You inherited people classified as pipe fittings. I inherited a machine the wider empire would reproduce on every route if it understood the method. Concealment kept this atrocity confined to one world. Lysa pointed to the flare records. You also continued it. Oren's hand closed around his keys. Those 11 illuminations carried 28,000 ships, grain fleets, hospital convoys, children under evacuation seal. You may condemn the arithmetic, Auditor. You may not remove its answer. The chamber gave him a child's song. Oren stopped breathing. Senna had been 19, broad-shouldered, impatient with ceremony. She had worn his shrine keys once in mock procession and declared herself prelate of unfinished breakfast. During the previous Great Remembrance, her relational profile had exceeded the emergency threshold. Oren had signed the authorization because he had signed all such authorizations. He watched her enter a booth. Afterward, grief compromised his measured judgment. He therefore surrendered the grief. The assessors took Senna's face, her voice, the breakfast procession, and the knowledge that he had condemned his own daughter. He kept only a conviction that an unnamed sacrifice had been necessary. His knees struck the floor. The keys scattered but did not leave their ring. "Where is she?" he asked. Corder 9 answered. "Subject survived extraction for 11 years. Subsequent maintenance death. Remains processed without civic attribution." Oren bent over the keys. He did not ask forgiveness. There was no one present who possessed the authority to grant it, and the one person who might have wanted to was dust beneath an unnumbered floor. Across the city, collection bells began to sound. Dren's order opened on every public speaker. Citizens were instructed to report calmly for protective remembrance, carrying identity documents and one family witness. Orn listened until the wording reached its allotment clause. Lysa read the same clause in the sealed calculation. The city was not being asked for one memory. Every citizen had been allotted all available identity. By the 5th bell, the queues reached across 3 processional wards. Some citizens came beneath guard. Others arrived voluntarily after public projectors showed the 9th Penitent Armada turning before a wall of blue storm. Hospital ships appeared as small white marks among the war vessels. Refugee transports showed crowded observation galleries, faces reduced by distance to pale dust against glass. Cendrell understood what its obedience purchased. That did not make the price voluntary. Families tied cords around their wrists. They recited full names, kinship, room shared, injuries witnessed, debts forgiven and unforgiven. Children repeated the lists when adults faltered. The cords had no power over the lantern, but hands tightened around them as though relationship could be held inside a knot. At one cord, a woman made her sons repeat the day they had hidden beneath a furnace stair. One son remembered smoke. The other remembered her singing. She corrected both details, then made them begin again while the queue advanced beneath the bells. Inside the basilica, confession booths were stripped of curtains and devotional screens. Corder 9's attendants replaced memory ampules with intake conduits thick enough to drain a lifetime without changing vessels. Behind each row waited transport carts fitted with restraints, blankets, and blank inventory plates. The bodies would remain alive. That administrative distinction had survived every previous remembrance. Dren assigned officers to every booth. Some lowered their weapons after seeing the carts. Others tightened formation. A father struck an attendant who tried to separate his witness cord. 3 strangers restrained him, kept reciting his names when he forgot why he fought. The queue closed and moved onward without breaking cadence. Dren watched the conversion from the central aisle. Avara's original method worked, Lysa told her. There may be another way. May? I have seen its founding structure. I have seen ships enter an unlit passage. Bring me a method, not an ancestor's intention. Keir was already moving through the lampworks. Bells carried his instructions where faces could not. The unrecalled gathered at 3 intake conduits with cutting wheels, insulated hooks, and the quiet fury of people ordered to service their own erasure. If they severed the lines too early, the lantern would draw directly through public receivers. If they waited, the booths would make resistance irrelevant. Oren stood between the first queue and the shrine controls. Every few seconds Senna returned to him, laughing with his keys, entering the booth, asking whether duty could recognize a daughter. Between those memories came the Armada count, millions of living strangers pressed against the other side of his grief. At the shrine controls, Oren could authorize the receivers or seal them behind extraction priority. His keys shook against the plate. Each returning piece of Senna made duty less abstract and choice less clean. He asked the machine for casualty projections under concordance. Corder 9 displayed a field of uncertainty and called it unacceptable. Lysa returned below. Avara's founding diagrams had been preserved as decoration because later custodians no longer understood their grammar. Corder 9's indexed copies displayed isolated donors arranged around a central saint. Lysa rotated the oldest plate. The supposed rays were pairs. Every line ran from one living participant to another before touching Avara. Concordance did not depend upon the quantity of recollection. It depended upon agreement. One person remembered a scar, the other remembered receiving it. One named a promise, the other carried the consequence. The shared memory formed a closed relation, stable because neither mind held it alone. Two people who truly retained one another created more coherent direction than 1,000 severed fragments screaming separately in glass. The same relation could guide a stolen memory home. Lysa traced the return channels through the diagram. Stored fragments could be sorted by the people who recognized their edges. A smell of rain would not be released into a random mind. It would travel along names, faces, places, and mutual witness until the correct network accepted it. The requirements assembled with merciless clarity. Every civic speaker had to become a listening channel. One participant must name another and speak a true memory belonging to both. The exchange had to continue without interruption throughout the Armada's crossing. A living index must stand beside Avara, holding the millions of relations in order while the machine rebuilt its path. The index would not remain singular. Personal memory and collective memory would pass through the same mind until ownership ceased to have meaning. Whoever entered the cradle might survive in body. The person who left would be unable to prove which childhood, love, crime, or grief had been theirs. Lysa took a pocket recorder from her red satchel. She set it on the brass plate and spoke quietly. "Your name is Lysa Rook. You were an auditor because someone removed your sister and taught you to trust the removal. If you hear this without knowing the voice, believe the evidence. Kia Sol brought you below. Tavia existed. The people here exist. You chose to help them remember one another." She stopped the recorder before courage could become performance. Above, the collection queues moved forward. Kia's first cutting wheel touched an intake conduit. Dren demanded Lysa's findings over the official channel. Oren lifted his keys but had not yet chosen which lock to open. Corder 9 completed its own calculation. "Sabotage probability exceeds acceptable continuity loss," it announced. The lantern started 53 minutes early. The lantern ignited before Lysa could leave the Foundation choir. Amber light struck every wire beneath Cendrell at once. The ancient rings surrounding Avara began to turn, shedding flakes of warm metal into the dark. Far above, extraction booths sealed their doors around citizens who had been promised a protective remembrance and prepared instead for the removal of everything by which they might be known. The unrecalled did not wait for a second bell. They came up through maintenance shafts, coolant trenches, ash chutes, and inspection hatches omitted from every civic plan. They carried turbine hammers, cutting torches, cable hooks, and the small service bells by which they kept one another present. There was no charge and no shouted oath. People whom the city had classified as equipment went quietly to interrupt the machinery that used them. Security met them in the lampworks. The fighting was confused, close, and profoundly unequal. A trooper would see a grey-smocked woman crossing a gantry, raise his weapon, glance toward his commander for confirmation, and forget why the weapon was raised. Shots followed bells. Bayonets struck moving tools. Men fired into doorways because a comrade insisted someone had entered them, though neither man could retain a face long enough to describe it. The unrecalled suffered the ordinary disadvantage of being made from flesh. Their enemies suffered the administrative disadvantage of losing the battle every time they looked away. The unrecalled learned to fight by consequence. They opened steam valves, dropped lift cages between squads, and painted fresh amber arrows toward conduits that had already been disabled. Each runner repeated the next runner's name before breaking contact. If one fell, a bell remained tied to the railing where another could find the task. Security could occupy a corridor. It could not remember what the corridor protected. Keir reached the primary intake conduit with 3 runners and a satchel of thermal wedges. The conduit was a brass throat broad enough to swallow a transport carriage. Amber moved through its glass veins in pulses, each one containing some warm domestic ruin, bread shared in winter, a hand held beneath rain, a daughter singing behind a closed door. He set the first wedge. Gunfire opened the runner beside him. Keir struck his bell and shouted his name, forcing the soldiers to find him again. It was an act of courage with poor tactical merit. Dren corrected the problem. She ordered tether lines across the gantry and surrendered target recognition to automated heat trackers. Iron cords snapped around Keir's legs and waist. A round entered high on his right side, spun him against the conduit, and left blood running beneath his grey smock. He still managed to drive the second wedge halfway home before Dren's gauntlet closed around his amber throat cord. "Keir Soul," he said through his teeth, "if you intend to arrest me, remember whom you caught." "The machine will remember," Dren answered. It already remembered too much, and without mercy. The premature flare drew against 4,000 years of sealed recollection before the extraction geometry was ready. Ampoules burst in their racks. Reservoir glass sang. Across lumen sepulchra, stolen lives leaked into minds that had never lived them. A woman in a ration queue seized a stranger's face and called him by the private name of a husband dead 6 centuries. Furnace workers remembered dancing beneath chandeliers in noble houses buried under the present city. A security sergeant dropped his rifle and wept for twin daughters who had never been born to him. Children spoke with the grief of old soldiers. Old soldiers tasted milk from mothers they had never known. Ancient strangers opened doors across Cendrell. Oren stood before the shrine controls, while every public speaker carried Senna's childhood song. He knew the missing notes. He knew where she had always forgotten to breathe. The knowledge bent him more completely than any wound. Lysa reached the control nave with ash on her face and her left sleeve torn from wrist to shoulder. Dren followed with Keir bound beside her. Corder 9 waited in its rail cradle, 4 porcelain faces turning toward 4 different emergencies. Lysa placed Avara's founding diagram across the command lectern. The lantern can form its coordinate without extraction. Concordance uses relationships that remain alive. Open the Vox channels. Let citizens name one another, and Avara can return the stored fragments through the same network. Dren looked at the storm clock. Probability. Great Remembrance will produce adequate passage illumination with a projected success of 93.1%, Corder 9 said. Concordance has incomplete historical evidence. Estimated success is 61.8%. Structural survival of this installation is below 19%. And survival of the city under Great Remembrance? Lysa asked. Biological survival, 88%. Retained personhood, negligible. Dren's face did not change. Beyond the tactical glass, the 9th Penitent Armada touched the outer turbulence of the Widow's Passage. 3,940,000 people had reached the place where a cruel certainty became difficult to refuse. One escort vanished from the display, returned several thousand kilometers from its assigned position, and began transmitting the evacuation hymn of a ship dismantled 80 years earlier. The storm was no longer approaching. It had begun choosing among them. Orin removed the master shrine key. "Open the booths," he ordered. Attendants hesitated. He turned the key himself. Throughout the city, confession doors released their occupants before the needles could descend. For one breath, Cendrell remained populated by people who still knew their names. The lantern classified their release as a system failure. Every vox grill in Lumen Sepulchra brightened to amber. The speakers ceased carrying Senna's song. A pressure like cold fingers entered each listening mind. Denied its booths, the lantern began to harvest the city directly. The first thing the vox took was attention. Citizens stopped in streets, homes, and extraction aisles with their faces turned toward the nearest brass grill. Lysa watched the harvesting wave advance across Corder 9's civic diagram. "The network is already inside them," she said. "Reverse the direction. It is drawing relationships upward. Make it carry witness outward." She traced the founding circuit with one soot-blackened finger. The extraction relays were built around a simpler path still present beneath their housings. Every recall gauge could confirm a shared memory by matching the emotional pattern in two living minds. Cendrell had spent centuries adding locks to a door designed to open both ways. Dren studied the Armada display. 9 minutes, she said. If your light does not form, I restore extraction. In 9 minutes there may be no one left to restore. Then spend them well. Orin crossed to the public channel reliquary. 11 locks guarded it, one for every emergency his predecessors had concealed beneath another name. The shrine keys hung heavily from his ring. He opened the locks. Each produced a civic bell somewhere above, until the entire city seemed to count down its own extinction. Corder 9 drove cable manipulators into an abandoned bank of founding relays. Concordance routing will expose this cradle to unsorted mnemonic load, it reported. Porcelain isolation failure is expected. Can you route it? Dren asked. The question concerned outcome, not cost. Routing is possible. Beside Avara, a second suspension frame unfolded from the floor. Lysa removed her red satchel and set it under the lectern. She placed the brass recall gauge on top, followed by her office seal. The instruments looked smaller without her hands around them. Corder 9 fixed gold leads against her temples, sternum, and the circular scar surrounding her right thumb. The last lead passed through the dead augmetic at her left ear and touched bone. Avara opened her wired eyes. For an instant Lysa smelled rain on the refugee deck where Tavia had once held her hand. "Put them back," Avara whispered. Lysa entered the frame. Pain arrived as a city trying to remember itself. She felt millions of severed associations pressing against Avara's mind, each fragment searching for the person, place, and answering memory that could make it belong. The lantern had stored them as quantities. None of them had consented to remain alone. Orin opened the final channel. Lysa's voice passed through every speaker on Cendrell. Name one living person. Tell them one true memory that belongs to you both. Nothing ceremonial, nothing approved. Say what happened and let them answer. The city gave her silence. For generations, Cendrell had taught that memory was private property assessed by the state and owed upward. Citizens knew how to queue, confess, and surrender. They had no doctrine for keeping one another. In the processional wards, strangers stared at wrist cords whose knots they had tied that morning. In the extraction basilica, a father stood beside his son and searched for an authorized phrase. Blank quarter, families gathered beneath speakers they had maintained but had never been permitted to use. Silence was not refusal. It was the final procedure the city had taught them. The storm clock, Lost 30 seconds, 40. A small bell sounded in the control nave. Keir had pulled himself upright against Dren's tether. Blood darkened the bandage pressed high against his right ribs. He leaned toward the open command grill and rang the bell again. "My name is Keir Sol," he said. "I am 17 years old. Mira Sol is my mother. She works turbine line 7 and leaves food outside her door for a boy she cannot remember." In the lampworks, Mira heard him. She stood beneath a stalled heat exchanger with her brass wrench in one hand. Her eyes found the wounded runner displayed on a maintenance screen. For several seconds she saw only the familiar strange boy. Attention slipped. Keir rang the bell. A fragment returned through Lysa. Mira felt turbine heat against her face. She remembered a cracked pressure collar, steam whitening the chamber, and a 6-year-old child wrapping both arms around her waist. He had pulled until she fell clear. The steam had crossed his left forearm instead. She knew the burn. She knew who had earned it. "Keir Allen Sol," Mira said into the workshop grill. "You saved me on the day the 7th turbine broke. I carried you home because your arm would not stop shaking." Keir closed his eyes. "You sang the counting song," he answered. "You forgot the 4th verse." The first reciprocal line formed. It did not rise like the extracted beam. It passed sideways through the city, a thin amber thread between mother and son. Avara caught it. Lysa held their names apart from the millions crowding behind them. Corda 9 reported a stable coordinate and for once did not reduce it to a percentage. Other voices entered. A wife named the woman who had shared her ration bowl through a winter shutdown. 2 trench veterans remembered burying a third beneath a false mile marker. A brother confessed that he had sold his sister's keepsake before pretending it was lost. A machinist named the supervisor who had concealed the accident that took 3 fingers from his hand. A victim spoke the name of the official who had harmed her, and the official remembered. Love returned. So did debt, humiliation, tenderness, theft, cowardice, and guilt. Restoration offered no moral sorting service. The unrecalled named one another from the blank quarter. Their bells became unnecessary one by one. Orin approached the grill last. "Sena Vask," he said. "You sang whenever you were afraid, and I told you the machinery approved." No living voice could answer him. Lysa found Senna among the stored fragments and held the dead woman's memory beside her father's. "I remember," Lysa said. The extraction beam above Cendrell went dark. At that same moment, the 9th Penitent Armada committed every remaining ship to the Widow's Passage. The old light vanished from the Widow's Passage. For generations the lantern had been a single amber road through weather that could think. Its loss left the Armada among persuasive directions. False beacons opened ahead of the leading vessels. Some resembled harbour lights. Others wore the colours of childhood windows, burial candles or command signals issued by officers long dead. A hospital carrier turned 6 degrees toward the remembered voice of its captain's mother. Its escort fired warning flares across the carrier's bow. The flares curved upward and became a constellation no living navigator recognized. On a refugee transport, the forward observation glass showed a green valley to passengers who had never seen open soil. They pressed toward it until deck officers sealed the compartment and navigated by engine vibration alone. Deck crews answered with names. The fleet began to scatter. On Cendrell, people continued speaking. Each shared memory formed a line rather than a column. Amber passed from room to room, street to undercity, worker to soldier, parent to child, culprit to witness. The first lines reached the lantern crown. They did not burn memories, they gave them shape. Avara drew open the reservoirs beneath the city. 4,000 years of recollection entered Lysa in search of their proper relationships. A baker's pride in shared bread, a prisoner's hatred of a merciful guard, an infant's weight, a magistrate's concealed shame. The fragments arrived with physical certainty. Her tongue tasted salt from vanished seas. Her knees remembered kneeling before rulers whose statues had been ground into the present streets. She felt thousands of final embraces and thousands of ordinary departures that had only become final later. Each demanded return, and each could destroy a stranger if placed incorrectly. Lysa touched each fragment long enough to ask where it belonged. Avara supplied the answer. Together they returned lives to the networks from which they had been cut. The work did not distinguish Lysa's mind from the road it required. She forgot the title of her office. She saw the extraction scar around her thumb and could not remember who had placed it there. Tavia's face remained for several seconds longer. Lysa tried to hold the white crescent above her sister's eyebrow, the chipped front tooth, the impatient way she had squeezed Lysa's hand when adults spoke too slowly. Another 1,000 memories crossed. The crescent became someone else's moonlit window. The tooth belonged to a miner. The hand was every hand. Tavia disappeared a second time. In the control nave, emergency doctrine recognized falling extraction output and ordered all security personnel to restore the Great Remembrance. Dren cancelled the order. Her own troops advanced anyway, obedient to a command transmitted above her authority. She stood before the suspension frames in her black storm coat, red-lensed pistol held low, and warned them once. The first shot burned her left shoulder. Her iron right gauntlet remained steady. "The Armada needs a coordinate," she said. "It has one. Anyone who changes it will answer to the dead." The troops understood operational language. Most lowered their weapons. 2 did not. Dren was faster. Oren descended into the release gallery, where extraction gates had begun closing under automatic pressure. He wedged the ring of shrine keys into the drive and held the lever open with both arms. Senna's restored voice lived inside him now. It did not forgive him. It remembered asking whether the booth would hurt, and remembered that he had lied. He kept the gates open. Corder 9 measured the crossing. 27% of fleet tonnage has cleared primary distortion. Concordance coherence exceeds forecast by 12.4%. 1 porcelain faceplate split from brow to chin. 39%. Structural continuity of this cradle is no longer a relevant planning assumption. Keir sat against the command rail while Mira held the bandage at his ribs. Every time the lantern's field pulled her attention away, he said his name. Every time his own mind filled with borrowed childhoods, she answered with the turbine fire. "You were 6, she told him. "You forgot the 4th verse." "I always forgot the 4th verse." The line between them held. Beyond Cendrell, the scattered ships began to see the new path. It was not a road imposed through the storm. Millions of amber relations joined world to vessel, memory to witness, until each navigator could locate the next living mind ahead. Refugee holds passed between false signals that called them by beloved voices. Lysa no longer knew whether she watched from the lantern or from every bridge. She forgot the red satchel. She forgot the surname Rook. She retained one instruction: put them back where they belonged. 78%, Corder 9 reported. A further porcelain mask burst. Its cable arms shook under mnemonic load. 91%. Permanent index severance will extinguish the root. Avara looked at Lysa through eyes held open by gold wire. Beneath the amber damage, she was still 13. She had remained 13 while dynasties turned to dust around the machine that called her a relic. "Enough," Avara said. The final transport entered the last current. Its holds carried families removed from 3 dying worlds. Behind it, the storm closed like a fist. 99.8, the transport cleared. Passage complete. Lysa reached through the shared frame and released the gold leads at Avara's sternum. The permanent index stopped. Avara took one small breath that belonged only to her. Her eyes closed without machinery forcing them. After more than 4,000 years of official martyrdom, Saint Avara Pell died once. Corda 9 severed its own cradle before the lantern could resume extraction. Above the city something rang without a bell. The lantern crown fractured from top to foundation. Amber glass opened to the fixed red sky. The network light vanished, leaving only voices in rooms, still saying names because they had learned how. They found Lysa alive beneath the broken halos. Her augmetic was dark, soot covered her face, and brass wires had marked her skin. Kier knelt beside her. "You remembered us," he said. She studied him with patient, empty attention. "Then you will have to remember me." The 9th Penitent Armada emerged from the Widow's Passage with every vessel that had entered it. Its captains recorded 17 collisions, 41 navigation failures, and an unexplained change in beacon behavior during the crossing. They also recorded that 3,940,000 souls had survived. The first figures received formal review. The last was accepted as adequate. On hospital decks, surgeons resumed operations beneath lights that had failed inside the storm. Refugee children woke to the same frightened parents who had held them during the crossing. None knew the names spoken on Cendrell to keep their ships from vanishing. Cendrell woke under a broken crown. Returned memory did not produce peace. It produced mothers finding children, workers recognizing old friends and lovers recovering years that had been taken from between them. It also produced accusations in public squares, hidden debts, reopened crimes and grief for people long dead. Several officials attempted to return what they had remembered. The booths were no longer functioning, which was unfortunate for them and useful for justice. The old courts could not process testimony that their own seals had suppressed. Citizens assembled hearing tables in ration halls and turbine chapels. The first witnesses were the unrecalled oral registrars, people whom no prior court had admitted existed. Their evidence was imperfect, mutually corrected, and devastating. The lantern could not be relit. Without its index, the Widow's Passage narrowed each day, supply projections failed first, defense schedules followed. Cendrell had saved an armada and made itself unreachable by the empire that owned it. Fuel was rationed before the first week ended. Medicines were counted twice. Lampworks crews dismantled ceremonial machinery for usable copper, while the fixed red sun watched from the horizon. Freedom arrived without a supply manifest. Dren prepared the final report aboard her cutter. She described a catastrophic beacon failure, total civic loss, and progressive closure of the route. She classified concordance as a censor artifact and marked all supporting testimony unreliable. Her seal protected Cendrell from seizure by persuading every office that there was nothing left to seize. It also removed the world from supply, reinforcement, and law. Dren understood the distinction. She signed anyway. Oren placed the shrine keys on the steps beneath the fractured lantern. He did not ask forgiveness. People from the blank quarter came to tell him whom his orders had erased. He listened because listening was the smallest punishment still available to him. The first public census counted the unrecalled. It began at 87,421, rose by 600 before midday, fell when duplicated households were reconciled, and remained approximate at sunset. Lysa would once have rejected it. It was the first honest population figure Cendrell had possessed. Families spent the following days introducing themselves across tables they had shared for years. Some introductions ended in embraces, others ended with guards. The city had recovered its witnesses and therefore recovered people capable of giving evidence. She lived in a small room inside the audit close. Lysa recognized filing procedure, seal pressure, and the correct order in which to dispute an impossible total. She did not recognize the woman in the mirror. She wore plain gray clothing. The red satchel remained closed on a shelf. She could classify a memory, but could no longer claim one. Kier visited each morning. His amber cord held hundreds of new knots. He played the recording Lysa had made before the flare. If you cannot remember who you were, believe the people who can. Lysa listened twice. Tell me from the beginning, she said. Keir rang his service bell out of habit, introduced himself, and began with a city that possessed no dawn. Months later, Dren's sealed report reached a remote civic archive. A clerk opened the cylinder, read the disaster code, and did not read the testimony beneath it. He stamped Cendrell no surviving population, entered the loss against a regional total, and placed the cylinder on a shelf. From within the sealed brass came the faint sound of many people speaking one another's names. The clerk paused. His attention moved elsewhere. The Imperium forgot Cendrell completely, which was the first mercy it had ever granted the world by accident.